Sure, just let me know. Okay, we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order, and we'll open it up for public forum.
Doesn't look like anyone's joined.
Okay, we'll close public forum and move on to item number 1, approval of March 8th, 2023 minutes. Does anybody have any amendments to those minutes?
Tim, just FYI, it does look like a few people joined if you want to do public forum again. Sorry.
Okay, we'll open up public forum again. If anybody wants to, if the public wants to talk about anything.
No one's coming forward to speak.
Okay, close public forum then and move on back on to approval of the March 8th, 2023 minutes. Does anybody have any amendments to those minutes? Okay.
I didn't, so I can so move.
Okay. So move.
I'll second.
Okay, all those in favor of approval of the March 8th, 2023 minutes, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Those minutes are approved. And we'll move on to item number 2, the Luxair report. Steve?
Yep. Well, with the weather warming up, we've definitely seen a pretty massive increase in operations and fuel sales. Recently, we had the aerial surveyors come back and finish the job that they were working on in the fall. And then we have another aerial surveyor that's going to be here for the next 6 months doing some agricultural work, and looked into the operations tracking software stuff, and they're no longer offering the antennas for free, but they did have a thing that just sits in the windowsill that they do have for free. So went ahead and got that and got it set up today, and so we'll see what kind of information that can provide, but the free service is only going to give the last 7 days of operations. If we want to get the antennas as well as the historical operations, it would be $110 per month. And that is about all I got.
Anybody have any comments just for Steve or questions?
Yeah, Tim, I do.
Go ahead, Grant.
Tim, you said the last 7 days of operations, so it's the most recent 7 days, and it doesn't go back any further. Is that right?
On the free version, correct? Yep.
Yeah. Okay. And then can you repeat again what the service charge is, or the fee?
It's $110 a month.
Oh. So what additional comes with that over and above the free version?
Well, it would come with the antennas that we would have to install. So that would be more consistent coverage, because they did say the windowsill thing is going to have rather spotty coverage. And so it would be the antenna plus being able to go back as far as you want for the operations.
I see. Okay. Right. So once it just starts cataloging the operations on a given date, and then as you progress forward, you can go back to that originating date.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Interesting.
Steve, what sort of information is recorded?
It's based off the ADSB, and so it's going to have a lot. I saw a couple of operations pop up today already. And so it's going to have like the make and model of the plane. I think it even has an approximate estimation of like takeoff and landing times. It'll say if it's a reciprocating engine, it'll say if it's single engine, and I think I think that's all of the pertinent information that it'll give. It also gives you the opportunity to upload the tail numbers of all the based aircraft, and so you can tell on the reports then which of the operations are from based aircraft and which are from transients.
But just so everybody's aware, though, that still doesn't not capture every aircraft that would land there. I mean, you have to have the equipment in order for it to. Am I right, Steve? I mean,
Yes.
it's not okay.
I would say that, I mean, the majority of planes are going to.
Right.
Well, we could try it for a month and see how it works.
Yeah, I mean, I figured at least with the free version, we'll see how accurate it can get. And I can, once we have a week's worth of data, kind of compare it to what we're getting from the front desk and see how it compares.
Anybody have anything else? Okay. Move on to item number 3, the chairman's report. I really don't have anything. So we can move on. Items for discussion and or action. Number 1, recap of O&M budget structure and management model. Who's taking that? Is that you, Grant, or?
Yeah, I've got that, and I think Ryan's on. He may want to fill in any gaps that I create, as well as I see Jane is also joined the meeting, and so it may be necessary if there's something that she wants to add in. So let me just quickly, before I share my screen, just preface this. So this is identical to the information that I shared with the AVT at our last meeting a few weeks ago, and wanted to share it also with you for discussion and some Q&As around what's presented. I think the budget structure and management model, if my memory serves me correctly, we've covered off on that at a prior meeting. And so what would be new would be the item 2 on the agenda, the HDR Anderson Bogert optimization project summaries. And so let me see if I can go ahead and get this squared away for you. All right, can you all see that?
No.
Not yet.
Hey,
Oh.
one other thing too, before you get too much further, Grant.
Yeah.
When they talk about items for discussion and or action, just so that everybody's prepared, what items on this list are actually something that's actionable? Is there anything that, I mean, just so that people are, paying attention to,
Yeah.
to what?
So Tim, how I would answer that is several of the things that are quantified in this, and it'll be real clear to everybody. The committee has talked about several of these items before. And so I don't know that there's going to be anything that's a surprise there. It's just that through the consideration that Jerry Cyril gave in terms of his condition assessment report that he provided us all about a year ago, he had put together a scenario of sequence projects in that document to optimize Charlie 17 and optimizing not only the navigational and safety related concerns, but also then optimizations on the ground side facilities. So we'll see that in just a second. But there really won't be anything that is, I would think, very surprising. What Jane then subsequently did is an update of cost opinions for each of the individual products or projects and their subcomponents in order to bring those into $2023. And many of these activities, projects were, I believe, also cited in the original ALP. So what this has done is just to recast and provided an updated structure and cost opinions relative to some critical actions that you all have been kind of familiar with. So let's go ahead and see if I can get this to work here. Okay, so we kind of already just discussed this recap of the budget structure and management model that has been discussed with the AVT, and you all have seen those outtakes, and then presentation of the optimization project structure or summary. So keeping this at somewhat of a high level, through the exercise of comparing multiple sample budgets that were acquired from area airports, what we did then is assemble an exemplar budget that included these kinds of elements for revenue streams, that is income, and then also to try to quantify the expense areas that logically would need to be contemplated in any kind of an operations and maintenance budget. So the specific dollars and cents that either of these would entail for any line item, would ultimately be negotiated items between the FBO, and in the scenario that we have been looking at this, the city, who would be contracting with the FBO. And there are some ways to optimize this income flow and expense flow so that an interest that I know my colleagues on city council have is that the airport is really cost neutral to the city, which it is presently not. So again, this is just a matter of income. What are the income streams? How do those look? Who's receiving that income stream for their business benefit? And then how are the expense streams being supported? And so I'll leave it at that for just a second to let anybody who has questions fire away. So the upshot of this exercise was, for the model that was put together, it seems like it is a reasonable expectation that a operational and maintenance budget structure could be put together so that it achieves certainly some positive revenue for an FBO, and it achieves, hopefully then the target is cost neutrality for the city. Okay, any questions here? So that's one of the primary points of output that we wanted to get to help certainly inform future decision making relative to the airport. Okay, The other thing is that there were two basic models for airport management that had been built and discussed. One of them had a segmented assignment of responsibilities between the city and the FBO. And in this case, this makes the assumption that the city funds a position or allocation of an existing position to be the airport manager. But that, I think in some is a kind of is out of the expertise of our city organization. And so this particular structure was not preferred given the current state of Charlie 17. It just didn't seem that this was a good fit for the current kind of operations that the airport represents. So what was at least seemed to be a better fit is to really integrate several layers of activities and have that be managed and overseen directly by the FBO, given the fact that they would naturally have the competencies and experience in order to really run many of these activities. And then there would be points of contact or a designated point of contact within the city, as well as with the airport committee, in order to provide an oversight and governance of the integrated set of activities that are occurring at the airport. And the other thing that would go along with this is periodic reports to city council. And, you know, in my mind's eye, maybe it'd be like a quarterly airport report as part of a regular work session. So something akin to this sort of structure seemed to resonate more completely with the AVT members who had looked at this. And again, specific activities that are listed here under the FBO, those would be formalized and would be assigned through negotiation relative to contract structure. So I'll just pause on this to see if anybody has any questions. So this is, again, the primary objective here is to have a higher degree of integrated management of the activities at the airport.
Grant, are you thinking one of the city point of contact is one of the current team leaders or management department heads?
I don't know, Ryan, you want to respond to that? I would say yes, but I don't know that.
Can you repeat that question?
Well, Ryan, this is John. I was just saying that the city point of contact, would that be one of the current department heads? Probably that's, you know, already has lots of responsibilities.
Yeah, I mean, we would go through that determination and figure out who is the best. I mean, there could be a case to be made that it would operate very much like a department head, so report to myself until such time that we felt it was better to transition to a different department head, or it could just go right to like somebody like a Mike Barkalow or Public Services Department, Ryan Miller. So yeah, I mean, that would be the ideal structure, but unless and until we get to that point, we wouldn't know. But it would depend on a number of different factors. But yeah, there would be a reporting structure here in the city.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions?
Grant, one question I have is in this scenario, the fixed base operator, that selection process or that how that is assigned would be through some sort of RFP or RFQ process. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement. Fair expectation. Yes.
Thank you.
So the one thing I just want to comment about is this was a necessary consideration when, under the assumption that we would want to have the entirety of the airport be under municipal ownership. Okay, in other words, not the current month, which doesn't have necessarily the management integration for all of the critical activities there. Other questions? Okay. So on to the work that Jane and Jerry did, and really a little bit of background and structural orientation to this. So the question that we know that we have to ultimately answer is if we want to take the basic activities, or I should say the improvement projects that were identified in the HDR assessment report from a year ago, we need to understand, well, what does the structuring look like? What are the dollars that are required in order to support these projects? And how does all of that interface with the strategic budgeting structure that Ryan and the city leadership team are putting together? And, I want to tell you, I heard from this group on multiple times that there was commitment made to the ALP way back when. However, there was never a plan set forward to achieve it. And so this is the beginning step to understand what's necessary, in what sequence, in what timeframes, and can that reliably be supported through our city budgeting process. And the other comment I will make is just to keep in mind, by virtue of location, we'll never be in a position to join the NIPIAS, because being in the NIPIAS ends up making available, federal funding from the FAA to do a lot of different things. Iowa City gets that, but given where we're sitting geographically and in proximity, we just don't have that ability, because the rules say you got to be 30 miles away from the nearest NIPIAS airport to be considered. Well, we've got several of them that are within 30 miles of Marion. The other thing that I would comment on is, I think I said it a few minutes ago, many of these activities were contemplated in the original ALP. So what this is it's refreshing what is necessary and refreshing the dollars so that we have a sense as to what is necessary and logical to do. So all of what you see here, and we'll come back to it in a second, all of this is in the category of phase one. which would be executable in a nearer term basis, 0 to 5 years. In the case of further out, there is a phase 2, which is in the kind of tan section at the top, and a phase 3, which is longer range, 11 to 20 years. Phase 2 and phase 3, somewhat independent of those timeframes that are identified for them, the key feature to these is they're driven by aviation demand. And so under any given set of conditions that would give us a step increase in aviation demand sooner than what we're anticipating, then maybe phase 2 or elements of phase 3 would come into place sooner than what this chart is suggesting. So now I'll stop with that. We'll go back and look in more detail at phase 1. But any questions about the layout of this, how it's structured, differentials between the phases, why it's important for us to put these costs together? I'll just open it up for any questions that you all have.
Grant,
Okay.
just looking at these, I assume all these numbers have been updated and brought up to new current standards, because there was, those kind of dollars were never identified in that original AOP. So I figure that's what has all been updated.
Yeah. So let me, John, what I'll do is I'm just looking here at the bottom right of what's on the screen now. Total all phases.
Yes.
22 million and some change. I think the entirety of the original ALP, and I believe that was in 2017 dollars. Maybe they were 2016 dollars, so it doesn't make any difference. I think that whole project, all phases, all projects that it contemplated was something on the order of $30 million. So it was important for us to update the cost because of how inflation has acted over those, 7 years or whatever it's been.
But if you're talking 20 years out, though, these numbers aren't going to be accurate at all, right? I mean, if you get to phase 2 or phase 3, I mean, it's a good jumping off point, but it's not going to be relative in 20 years.
Well, and that's, but that's like anything else, any projects. I would say these phase total costs include, when it's been appropriate, some contingencies for the project, but that still may not, that may not address the inflationary trends for the out years. But I don't know how we would do that. But what was critical, again, about these numbers, and I'm going back to phase 1 at this point, is we needed to know the general size of what the commitment was financially, so that we can emboss that into the strategic finance plan to just see how does this work with all other competing priorities, as well as to give us some visibility into how do you fund these things. And so that work has not been done relative to the strategic budgeting process. Ryan may have a comment about that, but we're anxious to see kind of how this models out. And I think the highest priority would be to see how phase one can model out over the next 5 years. So this phase one, I think several of these things were on the improvement list that the committee has identified in the past. And the, you know, I know there was a lot of discussion about AWAS, a lot of discussion about the beacon. Several of, I would say a majority of these items are in one form or another to deal with aviation safety. And so that's why they're in the phase one grouping. And also certainly for like the terminal area items, project 4A, 4B, 4C, you know, part of those are to help enhance the efficiency and safety of aircraft movement on the ground. The biggest single item, and that we've just put this as a phase one total cost. The biggest single item is the first project listing, land acquisition for RPZs and also groundside facilities. And that probably represents, I don't know, arm's length. I think it's somewhere in the 30 to 40% of the total cost for phase one.
Hey, Grant,
Yes, go ahead.
I apologize. I've been having a heck of a technical problem this evening, so finally got my audio and working. I just wanted to interject something. I'm a few seconds late because I was trying to get online here, and it's from our last meeting too. And I understand the sensitivity about demand driven. I keep hearing demand driven, and I just wanted to place the comment wherever it be, and I know very sensitive to the cost issues and Ryan's view on this and his position and his safeguarding. But when you're building, when you're trying to entice businesses to come into the community, you have ground ready areas for them to come in. So they just have to build, and it reduces their efforts to come into your community. And somehow I'm having a conflict with demand driven and length of the runway, and it's kind of gets into if you build it, they will come. And I at some point I just want to get comfortable with there's the information out there that, okay, we are demand driven, but we're not going to be stifling the opportunities for businesses and people to use the airport. Maybe it comes down to just you take the position, this is not something, we're not building this for the 5,000 foot runway in need aircraft, and that's just where we are. But if that's the case, then that's not demand. We're just gonna do it and not worry about any other capabilities above that. We're just going to build it to that capability. But after the last meeting of this, I just needed to say that this demand driven and versus having something shovel ready that people can come in and land at, and that will say, oh, I can land at Marion instead of Cedar Rapids because their runway's long enough, instead of not having that opportunity out there for people to do that because we're not ready for it. So that's my comment. I just had to enter it at some place in all these proceedings. And now I'll go unmuted again if I have the technological capability to do that.
But and if I can, I'll just speak to that really quick, because you know, it's a balancing act, and the airport is going to be competing against road projects, is going to be competing against sewer projects, and all the different capital improvement projects that we have to go through. And just, you know, I don't want to come across as flippant. That's not my intention with this illustration that I'm going to give, but, you know, we have a tremendous amount of infrastructure needs when it relates to sewers and roads. And, you know, we've done the study of the sewers and roads. And unfortunately, we just don't have enough money to do them all at once to make, you know, to accommodate the growth, to, you know, to build out the sewers to different areas of town where it's undeveloped and build it, and it will come. And it's just, it is one of those quagmires that municipalities are in when it comes to funding, because you have so many different competing needs. And the way that those types of projects get funded is through the issuance of debt, which then goes on the property tax bills, which then we hear about. And then, you know, when we hear about it, the state hears about it, and then the state gets forced to do what they're trying to do now. So there is that thought, build it and they will come, but then there's also that balancing act that we have to make sure we do, because we have so many different competing needs, that we have to be mindful of how we're spending those dollars on all the different buckets that we have to spend them on. I don't know if that makes sense.
Well,
But
Ryan, I totally understand where you're coming from. I just, I used to take care of the capital projects budget for Lynn County, so I totally understand what you're going through. I just wanted to put out there the conflicting philosophies of, you know, in one case, we build it to entice, and in other cases, we are building it based upon demand. But as I said, I'm totally sensitive to where you're coming from.
So, Mike, you know, and I appreciate, well, at the last AVT, you kind of asked this question as well. And I really appreciate it, given your direct experience in you know, governmental management. Here's, I guess it's kind of been my belief. If phase one is really aligned around aviation safety and providing some capability that will be appreciated by the flying public, and I'd really hope that Bonnie and Tim and others kind of comment about this, but as it says here in this chart, total cost and comment column on the right, the objective is optimize safe and efficient operations for flight school, private aviation, business charter ops, to the degree those would happen, pretty much current state, and to stimulate aviation demand. And so I might be completely off, but I heard people comment about the criticality of AWOS for Charlie 17. And I'm just using that as an example. Well, if we had that, my question is, wouldn't that give us a little bit of demand increase?
Yeah,
Wouldn't it adjust to some way?
I
Well-
think it all comes down to I'll let the pilot answer your question first. Go ahead.
The thing about AWOS is that what will happen is when we do get our precision approaches in, you won't have to use, since you would be using the Cedar Rapids altimeter settings, you would have different DAs that you could land on with those precision approaches if we had AWOS on field. But it still doesn't, it changes how the planes that are on the field and the planes that use the airport now automatically react when we're in an IFR situation. But it wouldn't, it probably wouldn't entice more aircraft that are larger and you know, have more capabilities. But Bonnie, you can add to that if you think there's anything I missed, but I mean, the AWAS is a nice piece, but it doesn't really change what we can attract for size and weight of aircraft.
I agree with what you're saying, Tim. If you're having to use AWAS to do the approach, which means you've got IFR conditions, which usually means not the most favorable runway conditions. Anything that we have out there now is probably still going to be able to land, but we're not going to bring anything bigger in. Even a King Air is not going to land at Marion with wet runways because the stopping distance. So we're really boxing ourselves in, staying at 3,700 feet. That's my feelings.
We can, this is, you guys are the pilots, you guys understand a lot of this stuff. And I mean, this is where we've got to have the balance and go through and working with the consultants and trying to figure out how do we prioritize? I mean, but Mike was talking about the CIP and working with the county. I mean, that's what we do with our CIPs now at the city is each item is going to compete with each other item. And how do you prioritize that to maximize what we can do? And so while there's this desire to extend the runway and the belief that it's going to generate more traffic and bring in more different types of aircraft, that's one thing, but it's like you got to build the foundation first. And that's what we're hearing from our consultants on this of, you know, when you look at this, these are the areas that we need to do first. Safety, take care of these things, manageable chunks, and then you start looking at and really optimize the safety and the operations of it before then we can get to those other areas of extending the runway. I think Grant's going to get to this on the next slide. But this whole exercise that we're going through, just to remind everybody, is the charge of the AVT is really to develop a recommendation to the council on whether or not this is something that we pursue and purchase, or do we get out of the business? And because I think everybody understands that the way it's structured now is just not sustainable. And so we've got to put together this level of scenarios to try to run it and have some baseline for the decision-making process for the elected officials. So, you know, we can argue or debate the merits of each one of these, and you all have your points and they're valid points, and the consultants have provided us with that information, and it's all valid information. And it's just, you know, for the purpose of running the scenarios to get to the data that AVT and then ultimately the council can kind of really make some informed decisions about the future of the airport. And that's really what this exercise is. So I say that because I don't want to have this group get caught up in the minutia of some of these things, because some of these things are just that, are scenarios at this point. There's still a lot of work that has to be done by the AVT. You know, one of the things that, you know, Grant and I were talking about as the next charge for the AVT is we're talking about optimization and capital improvements, but we also have to look at and think about, on the contrary, if the council were to say, yeah, let's purchase it, but what if the council said, no, let's sell it? So what are the cost impacts, and what are the things that we have to think through on that side too? So again, it's just kind of getting a total picture, doing the research on all the different fronts, so we have a pretty good understanding of what could be, with the realization that if the council says, let's purchase it, what is presented here today on the optimization phase 1, 2, and 3, you know, as part of the budgeting process, some of those things might flex. We might get a grant, and something in phase 2 or 3 might get bumped up to 1 because we can accomplish it quicker. That's certainly what's happening with Albernet Road as an example. $7 million grant. So guess what? That jumped up ahead. So again, I share some of that because while all the merits are good, it's just, I don't think it's worth getting into some of the nitty gritty on this, because there's a lot to be done and it's still a very fluid document. It's still a very fluid process. So I hope that makes sense. My intent is not to debate or criticize or sound like a wet blanket on anybody's point of view, but this is a snapshot of where we're at in that process. And we just want to make sure that you all are being informed along that way. And I'm going to let Grant correct anything that I might have misstated or said incorrectly.
Ryan, if I would, I just want to clarify my comment. I understand the safety thing and enticing aircraft are two different comments. I mean, it's two different sides of the coin, basically. Yes, this will enhance the safety. I guess to Mike's point, they're both right. Both comments are right. One side is safety and one side is enticing other aircraft in. That's all I wanted to say. So.
Thank you.
So just taking a look at phase 2 and phase 3, and as Ryan said, there might be a situation that would present itself that, some of the phase 2 or 3 things could be accelerated and done sooner than what this depiction indicates. Understanding what we have on our current city to-do list for capital projects. Ryan mentioned that there's we've got a large amount of sewer work that has to be done, and that's looming out there, something to the tune of $50 million. And I think Mike's on the phone, and if I'm kind of out of spec with that cost, please let me know. But
it's 83.
What's that?
It's 83 million, but close enough.
Well, obviously, I didn't meet the engineering estimate on that bid. So, okay, 83 million. And so as we take a look at something with that magnitude, and if we were to bring forward the cost of an east-west runway, whether it be in its initial footprint or its full build-out footprint, it's just kind of that looming hard reality. Is that ever going to be achievable? And what's it costing us to make that assumption? Medco's hanging on to property that they, in theory, can't sell. And that's also eroding, ultimately, revenues that would be important to the city as well, because if you had commercial entities on those lots that have been held in reserve, that would end up be a source of revenue for the city and the projects that it wants to accomplish. So that's another dynamic we have to look at. What in phase 3, and I think this was represented in the HDR report, the notion of going to 4,000 feet with the runway. And Jerry has, and Jane have looked at this, doing the extension on either the south end or the north end to achieve 4,000 feet. And the real question is, and I think others have asked this, but at some point we have to say, does that provide any value whatsoever going to 4? And that's in part why that particular project is listed further out, because we really have to, answer that question. Does that provide any innate value to what we're trying to achieve? So I guess this just gives us a framework in terms of how to think about it with some generalized updated costing. And to evaluate how it fits into the total financial modeling that the city has to take care of. Ryan, did you have anything else about these or any questions at all? So I guess maybe just in closing on this, I think our initial focal plane has to be, because of the safety implications, you know, understanding is this phase one, you know, how does this fit in the nearer term financial structure for the city, as well as, you know, are some of these items more critical to do sooner rather than later in the phase one sequencing? So this isn't a project plan per se. It is just the phases of projects that would have to unfold. Now, I think I've learned more about several of these things than I ever thought I would know, but this is an absolutely critical exercise to go through in order to inform the legislative process, which I'm a part of. So, I mean, this has all been very, very important, very critical consideration. Okay, that's all I have on this.
Any other further discussions or comments to Grant so we can move on, or? No? Okay, moving on to item number 2, presentation and discussion, HDR, Anderson Bogart's Charlie 17 optimization project summaries. Is that all we just already did, Grant, or is that?
Yeah,
added to it?
that's what
part
we
of
did.
it.
Yep.
Okay. Then item number 3, operational concerns discussion. I guess where do we go with this one?
Do you want to take this one, Grant, or you want me to take this one?
Well, so the item 3 and item 4 are somewhat directly related, but I guess the thing that is important, and if I think, you know, think back to one of those management models, the importance of the airport committee is to provide some oversight and some direction relative to anything that they have awareness of relative to improvement of the operating profile of Charlie 17. So I guess this, at least initially, Tim, would just be, you know, has there been any experience here of late that suggests that there's an operational concern that needs to be considered and potentially addressed out at the airport? And then that feeds into item number 4, which I'm going to let Mike talk about.
I mean, I can't think of anything new that we haven't already discussed that's glaring. I think the safety concerns that we've had or that are existing are still existing, and but I mean, there hasn't been anything new added to that list that I can recall. Maybe Bonnie can think of something, but I can't off the top of my head.
I have nothing.
This is John. I just got a quick question. That was all very good discussion. And and no pun intended, as Ryan says, this is looking at the airport at a high altitude. Okay. What could be possibly the ultimate? And every study like this has one other option, that is do nothing. So in many studies that I've done, that's always the first option you bring to the policymakers is, well, we can do nothing, which very seldom is that the case though. But I'm trying to figure out the other option of all this you've laid out. What's the other side? That now we're discussing safety issues and operational issues. So I just don't think do nothing is an option, if you know what I mean. So, no, that's a very good study. You've gone into great detail, but what's the other option?
John, if Mike or Ryan have other perspectives, but just from my own vantage point, in the HDR study, and I believe all of you have had access to that in the past. One of the scenarios was do nothing. But that was not recommended. From my vantage point, and Ryan and Mike can correct me on this, but doing nothing means that fundamentally we have nothing but a unbenefited expense in the city budget year in and year out. The city doesn't gain any revenue stream from anything that's going on out there. Not structured. It wasn't structured for that. And it would be, and there's ideas to generate revenue, but then that might run counter to, within the current structure, would run counter to enticing demand. So that's why, in my mind, that's why do nothing is not acceptable, because right now we just have an expense flow that doesn't have any offset. Ryan,
I'll jump in, and then we're just, for point of order, we are going back on the agenda. So I just want to make sure we're staying on task with the agenda, because we were on 3 and 4 and we're going back to 1 and 2. But Grant, what you said, there's that. Then when we look at the safety aspects, we have an obligation as a city to make sure that we are implementing and doing things to ensure the safety and viability of a city asset, of which this is. So while the do nothing is an option, what Grant stated, the other thing that we've got to do is the safety aspect and make sure that it is viable and justifiable to the taxpayers. But third, and I think this is the most important, where do nothing is not an option, and that is Luxair has told us specifically they need to do something and they want to do something. And that's why when we negotiated the lease, the revised lease that we have with them, they had indicated that, we have the year to work within, and then we have an extended out clause so that we can do the evaluation that we have to do to determine whether or not, because they've made it clear to us that they need to get out of it. So, but you're right. Do nothing is always an option, and that will get wrapped into the overall evaluation process when we're at the end of the road of exploring the different paths with the AVT.
Okay, thanks. When we started talking about safety, we still have to do that, and that was my real point, bringing that up. So thanks.
And the safety is really kind of the crux of this operational, these 2 items on the agenda. And I think Chair, if we can pretty much jump to the next item. I mean, this kind of gets to the crux of it.
Yes, absolutely.
And Mike, you wanna share kind of what we got and what we're looking at?
Yeah, so make sure I'm unmuted. Yep. So basically we had a resident that was concerned about wildlife out there with some wet detention basins that some have existed for a long time, some have been cleaned up as part of the development that's gone out there. And so with that, we've reached out to PNN, Luxair. I made a phone call to Jeff if there's been any bird strikes or any issues out there. Not really hearing of much. We went ahead and took the step of talking with Jerry, and he recommended we reach out to the DOT. So I've actually reached out to Mike Marr, the safety inspector with the DOT, and he's going to come out there with the USDA Wildlife Service and basically do an evaluation to see if there's mitigation measures that should be taken out there and give us an idea. If we were a Nipias airport, there'd be a different procedure that we go with, but since we're not Nipias, this is what they recommend. So it's actually no cost to the city to do this. We don't know when they'll do it. They'll probably do it when they're in Eastern Iowa versus making a special trip. But eventually they will provide us with a report with any short-term or long-term recommendations for any mitigation. I know I've heard comments before that Jeff has driven his vehicle down the runway to get some deer or other things off the runway. So that's just something that we have to keep in mind. So we're having a third party look into it.
And this is all in relation to safety?
Yep.
Or, okay.
So it's just looking at that wildlife concern and are there things that we can do to
So I get
help
what you're
to
saying.
mitigate
Just-
any?
Sorry. I get what you're saying. It's like I've been out there for 15 years and I mean, wildlife in a rural area is always going to be an issue. And I don't know how, what they're going to tell you that they can do about it, but it's living in Iowa. I mean, we're always going to have some kind of wildlife concern.
Yep, so this is just more of an informational thing. You know, we're gonna, anytime we get a complaint or a concern expressed, whether it's airport or sidewalk or junk and debris, we're gonna take it seriously and we're gonna make sure that we're reaching higher in our response. So, you know, I appreciate Mike working with our team of consultants and pursuing this. You know, at least we'll have we'll have some outside eyes and experts come in and give us some information that we can then, you know, if it's something that can be taken to the private landowners and given recommendations, and then we can do that. But at least we're going through the effort to make sure that we're maintaining as safe an environment as possible.
Sorry, my computer dropped off there.
I was just singing your praises, Mike.
Okay. Yeah, so once I get a report back from Mike Marr, I'll share it with the group.
And Tim, that concludes everything that we have on the agenda for today.
Hey, does anybody have any final comments or questions? Then we'll adjourn. Have a good night. Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks all.
Thanks all. Have a great night.
Thanks.